Today we will look at a very important aspect of airline operations, which is crew scheduling. We already had a look at a detailed presentation on aircraft scheduling, but along with the aircraft we also have to do crew scheduling. So this particular lecture will actually be in two parts. The first part is going to cover crew scheduling, and the second part is going to cover in more details one particular aspect of crew scheduling called as crew rostering and the day of operations control center. The content for this series of presentations has come principally from Ms. Geetika Kapil, who is a software developer based in the US, working in a company related to IT sector in an airline, and supported by Yash Kapshikar, the course TA. So both of them together have helped me in creating this content. Let's start by an overview of airline flight planning, because crew scheduling is the last part of this particular activity. So airline flight planning consists of these 5 connected but independent activities. So we will look at them one by one. First, let us look at network design. By network design, we mean deciding where an airline's aircraft will fly and how often will it fly. That is the goal of network design. Now, to meet this goal, there are a few important points. First point is that we need to pick the appropriate cities and the routes to connect, because it is driven by the market requirements. An airline is a business. You don't fly where you want to fly, you fly where people want to fly or where cargo wants to be transported. So you have to pick cities and choose the routes carefully, looking at the demand, looking at the competition, and looking at what resources are at your disposal. Then once you decide what route we will fly, we need to also decide how often we will fly. What is the frequency? Is it weekly? Is it daily? And in some sectors, you may have hourly flights. Okay, if the demand is such and the competition allows you, you might go for even hourly frequency. For example, there was a time when the Air India, when it was under the government control in India, they used to have on the hour, every hour flight from Mumbai to Delhi and back. So you could just decide to go at 8, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and then 1 and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Every hour there was a flight on the hour, every hour from Mumbai to Delhi, because that is the principal route in the country, which is also considered to be the 6th largest busy route in the world. Most of the airlines, they operate on the hub and spoke network. If you are not aware about hub and spoke, I would advise you to listen to my lecture on this topic in airline operations. So an airline has to choose which is our main hub airport or airports, so that the connectivity is best provided. Here is an example of network design. American Airlines is a very prominent airline in the US, and in response to the market demand, they actually added 3 daily flights from the existing from a busy airport in the New York called as JFK to Miami. You can see the flight is approximately 2 hours 50 minutes or 3 hours, and they are running some flights, and they have added 3 more flights because of the demand. Then we have schedule design. Once network is decided, the airline needs to decide the schedule. That is, you decide when your aircraft will take off and land. The important points in designing the schedule is to set the flight times for smooth connections, because in hub and spoke network, it is very important that connectivity is provided from the hub to the various spokes in both directions, matching with the flights operating in the hub. So, if you make the passengers wait for a very long time at the hub, either after landing, waiting for the connection to the spoke, or if you vice versa, if passengers have to come too early and wait at the hub, it can become a detriment and they might prefer to go by other airlines which offer a direct routing. So, it is very important, and also connectivity between the two hubs is for all the spoke cities both ways. Therefore, we have to time them very properly, and that is what is schedule design. You have to avoid airport curfews and peak congestion times. During peak congestion times, early morning and late evening, there is bound to be delay, and therefore either you incorporate that delay in your scheduling itself, or you try to avoid those times, but those could be the busy times or the times when people want to fly, then you have no option. The other thing is that at many airports there are night curfews or early morning curfews because of the neighborhood of the airport objecting to noisy operations during the times beyond 10 p.m. and up to morning 6-7 o'clock. So, while scheduling, it may be convenient for you, but you may have to avoid those curfews. And also, we need to budget enough time for the turnaround of the aircraft, boarding, deboarding, cleaning and all other maintenance checks that are needed. Here is an example. Delta Airlines, they time their flights at the hub Atlanta in such a manner that it gives very good connectivity to the other flights where people would like to connect to or connect from. Next important part is fleet assignment, which is essentially matching each aircraft that you have in your kitty to the route that you have chosen, and it has to be an appropriate match, okay, the right aircraft for a given route. So, generally what is done is, when you have busy routes where there is more demand, if the origin and destination airports permit, you would schedule larger aircraft from your kitty in that, whereas on lighter routes where demand is not that much high, you would schedule the smaller aircraft. Okay, but it all depends. You might offer small aircraft with more frequency to take care the small capacity. But when we plan the assignment of the fleet, we need to look at what are the fuel costs, what is the distance that is to be travelled, it should be within the ability of a specific aircraft, and also the demand that you anticipate to handle on those routes. One example of fleet assignment is United Airlines, UA. They are offering flights with Boeing 777, which is a long range jetliner, to operate between the busy route of New York JFK to London Heathrow, but on a smaller or a less demanding route, Chicago O'Hare to Houston, they are operating a smaller aircraft, Boeing 737. So, the same airline is offering different fleet combinations on different routes. The next item is aircraft routing. Routing basically means you plan the path that each aircraft will take. Earlier you have decided which routes you will fly, what frequency you will fly and which aircraft you will fly. But now you take every aircraft and decide where it will go from A to B to C, back to A or whatever. So, you need to keep track where every aircraft goes. We do not want aircraft to be standing at a remote location waiting for a long time on the ground, because aircraft on the ground means you are losing money. While planning the routing, we need to be careful to add time for maintenance and inspections of each aircraft, and we have to also avoid the aircraft languishing at an airport for a very long time with no operations. Here is an example. JetBlue, it operates an aircraft from JFK, that is in the New York, to Chicago, to Boston and back to JFK. All of this is done in one day. Okay? So, notice that the flight of the aircraft starts from JFK and ends in JFK. Keep this in mind when we come ahead to some rules regarding scheduling and routing. And finally, we come to the topic of today, and that is crew scheduling. So, once you have decided which aircraft will go from which place to which place at what time and how many times, you have to then assign crew members, both cockpit crew and the cabin crew. So the word crew here doesn't stand only for the cockpit crew, but for both cockpit and cabin crew. So we need to assign crew to each aircraft. Now, how do you assign the crew? That is what we will see in detail today. You need to follow the safety rules for duty hours and rest. You need to create a fair and efficient work schedule so that both the pilots are happy, the flight attendants are happy, and the airline is also happy. Plus, you need to have enough margin or contingencies to handle delays, changes, or any last minute sick calls by the pilots. Here is an example. Let us say a pilot in Chicago reports sick. So, we need to quickly assign a standby pilot or do many other things which we will see. So, with this we now come to the topic that we want to look in more detail, which is the last one, that is crew scheduling. We will look at its importance and also we will look at what are the challenges in implementing the crew scheduling. So, what is crew scheduling? Assigning cockpit crew and cabin crew to specific flights. And this is a very, very tender balancing act. You need to balance various quantities. On one hand, you have rules given by the regulatory bodies and you have also the availability of the crew. On the other hand, you have to look at the costs and the preferences mentioned by the crew members. So, you need to balance between rules and availability and cost and preferences. It is a very tough balancing act, as we shall see. But why is it important? Why do we need to spend resources, time and effort in good crew scheduling? Because this is a factor that ensures flight safety and regulatory compliance. Because crew scheduling is a way of controlling the labor costs, which can be a high proportion of the operating cost. Crew scheduling also ensures that your schedule is reliable and operationally maintainable. That means it will not be very common to cancel flights or reschedule them. You should be able to manage. If you have done a proper scheduling, you will have less interruptions. And finally, crew scheduling, if done properly, it impacts the crew satisfaction as well as the better service for the passengers. So, both your own employees, the pilots and the flight attendants, that is the crew members, as well as the passengers whom you serve, they are both going to be happy if you do a good job in crew scheduling. So, here is a typical breakdown of an airline that uses airliners as against ones that use small aircraft or very long range aircraft. So, I have recorded a tutorial on the DOC breakdown of commuter and regional aircraft. There the fractions might be a bit different, but for a typical airline that uses aircraft like Boeing 737, Airbus A320, okay, Boeing 787, 747, then these are called as airliners. For them, you can notice that the largest cost tends to be nearly 1/3 is the fuel cost. And then the next one is the crew cost, which also borders around 1/3, between 20% to 30%, 25% to 35% is what it is. Then we have the maintenance costs, which is about 1/6 to 1/5, and then there are others. Okay. So, you can notice that if you look at the summation of the crew and the fuel cost, it contributes to nearly 2/3 of the total operating cost. Crew scheduling, if done properly, helps in reducing the cost towards fuel and towards crew, and that is why it is very important. But what are the challenges? As I mentioned, it is a balancing act. It is a very difficult and very tough balancing act. So, where is the balance? You have to look at duty hours and rest regulations specified by the regulatory bodies. You need to look at the flight disruptions, delays, cancellations or emergencies which can happen anytime. Okay? You can plan for them if you know them in advance, but sometimes they happen without any additional warning. Then you have agreements and preferences. Generally, the crew members have their own union, and this union negotiates with the airline certain rules, regulations and procedures. One has to do the scheduling within the constraint of these agreements and as far as possible accommodate the preferences of the crew members. And then you have an issue that you are dealing with a very large network with thousands of flights, and therefore this problem is a very complex problem. It is not a small problem that you can just do by hand or you can do it simply by your experience. For a typical airline which operates hundreds of routes, maybe thousands of routes, it is humanly impossible to do scheduling by hand. So you need to look at support from computational resources. All these create a challenge, and we will see how these challenges are handled one by one. So there are actually 4 stages of crew scheduling which allows us to go from long-term preference or preparation to the real-time management of a scenario. So the 4 stages are as follows. The first one is called as planning. Planning is followed by pairing, crew pairing. Crew pairing is followed by crew rostering, and then the rostering is followed by recovering. So in this first part of this particular lecture series, we will cover planning and pairing, and in the second part we will look at rostering and recovering. And notice that this happens in this particular way, and it happens regularly, it happens every time. So what is planning as far as crew scheduling is concerned? Planning means looking ahead at flight schedules, and looking ahead could not be just one day, 2 days, it could be months in advance, okay? Because most airlines actually bring out their schedule twice a year. There is a winter schedule and there is a summer schedule. So you need to plan for your schedule much in advance, okay? Now to plan you need a lot of analysis, okay? What are the typical values? How many crew members are needed for each route? Because every aircraft and every route will require a set of crew members. If it is a short haul route within the flight duty time limitations, one set of crew might be sufficient. But if it is a long distance flight, you may have to carry one extra pair of crew members to relieve the crew members after their FDTL is exceeded. So for each route you need to know how many crew members are needed, okay? Then we need to also know which crew bases will handle specific flights, because crew members are humans, they live at specific places. So there may not be a pilot or an flight attendant available at the city from where you operate, so you will have to plan for it from some other city. Then how do you distribute the resources efficiently so that no one complains that I am underutilized or I am overutilized? And it has to happen efficiently and it has to happen with the fairness. Here is an example of planning. So American Airlines is a very popular airline in the US, and one of their hubs is the Dallas Fort Worth International Airport, DFW. Now this airline, it may position much larger number of crew members at Dallas Fort Worth during summer, because they expect a lot of demand in summer. So they have to plan in advance that when summer comes, we should have more pilots or more crew members available at or near Dallas Fort Worth. Please note that the bottom line is that planning sets the groundwork for all that follows. So planning is extremely important, and sometimes it becomes the starting point from where a good schedule comes out. Then you have the next step, which is pairing. Basically pairing means combining the flight legs into pairings or trips. For example, JFK to Chicago is one flight, Chicago to Denver is another flight, Denver to JFK is another flight. So when you come up with the combination of these, you get a trip, right? So when we do crew pairing, we need to build sequences that meet the duty requirements and the rest requirements. And there is a word there called legal requirements, which I will elaborate a little bit more. Right now we can assume that you have to build sequences that meet the requirements of the duty times and the rest of the crew members. But while doing this, we need to minimize the operating cost as far as the airline is concerned. For example, we need to minimize the cost of the hotel stays. Now, as I mentioned, this is a very big problem, so therefore it is not easy to do it manually. So large airlines normally use optimization algorithms for generating these pairings. because it is difficult to do it by hand. An example is Lufthansa and Delta, who are very well established airlines, and they have access to dedicated algorithms for the crew pairing assignment. And finally, we come to rostering. Rostering basically means assigning specific crew members to the pairings. So, we have the routes or the pairings available, but now which crew member will go from which airport to which airport on which aircraft, that is called as rostering. Now, some people think, what is rostering? You just have to fill in the slots. No, it is much more than filling the gaps or the slots. There are lots of factors that affect rostering. For example, every pilot is not qualified to fly every aircraft. Okay. So, then there is a seniority among pilots. So, therefore, you need to take care of the requirements of the seniors before you address the juniors. Many crew members have preferences on the location they want to go, preferences on what kind of schedule they like to fly. Do they want to come back the same day, or they are okay with overnight stay? There are many other preferences. So, there are many other factors which have to be considered in rostering. Okay. So, generally what is done is, the senior pilots, they are allotted the long haul international trips, and the junior pilots are deployed on domestic short haul trips. This is the general trend, but if there is a senior pilot who prefers domestic short haul routes, well, you will assign her or him to the routes of that choice. Also, rostering may involve some matchmaking. For example, let us look at an example of Emirates. Emirates takes a lot of effort in ensuring that the cultural diversity is taken care, and the flight crew or the cabin crew that goes, they are proficient in the languages that may be required at the destination or the source. So, you try to match the crew with language skills, and that also gives you a chance of better passenger service. Please notice, next time you fly, generally the announcements indicate that the flight attendants in this particular flight speak in Hindi, English, Punjabi, Gujarati. So, they try to tell you that we have matched the prospective passengers with the abilities of the crew members, so that you have a better passenger service. The last leg is recovering. Okay. This, as I mentioned, it comes under the day of operation stage, or DOPS in short. So, DOPS basically means solving the problem in real time as it appears, right. There could be a delay in the flight, there could be bad weather which is causing a problem, some crew member may report sick suddenly. Now, you need to recover from this, right. So, how you recover? You reassign the crew to prevent chain reaction of cancellations. Otherwise, one particular flight not being operated can lead to several other flights which will have a problem in the downstream. Here is an example. On one particular day in 2020, just before the pandemic became very prominent globally, there was a day in January 2020 when more than 1,100 flights had to be cancelled at Chicago because of bad weather. You can see the picture shows an aircraft of United grounded. Okay. Now, majority of the aircraft that were flights which are cancelled in this particular incident were from these two airlines, United and American. Now, both of these airlines, they have a very well established DOPS system. So, the DOPS was used as an automated recovery system to reallocate and reposition the crew members, and because of that, large number of flights, their schedules could be recovered despite serious weather problems. Okay. Now, we come to crew pairing. What is crew pairing? Strategic grouping of flights into logical and efficient trips for crew. So, crew pairing means that the airline groups the routes into complete trips, and they would prefer that the trip of a crew member starts and ends at the home base of the crew member, so that at the end of the day the crew member can go home and relax, be with the family and come again tomorrow. So, the other important point is that not every pilot can fly every aircraft. Each trip can be flown only by a properly qualified crew members. Okay. So, these trips are later used for rostering when assigning specific people to the specific routes. What are the objectives of crew pairing? The objectives are that we would like to cover all the flights with safe and low cost crew trips, and we would like to minimize the expenditure by the airline in hotel stays. We would like to minimize long waiting times for the passengers. Okay. There are some steps in crew pairing to achieve all these aims. First is that you need some data, some information regarding the operations. This information or the inputs come from the flight timetable, turnaround time data. Every airport has a different turnaround time generally, depending on the facilities available. Each aircraft has its own turnaround time. Then there are rest rules which can vary from country to country, and there are crew home database. That means which crew member lives where he or she would like to start and end their flight. This information is given to a huge computer program called as a crew pairing engine. This engine uses optimization algorithms to churn out the possible library of all the trips which are possible and which are legal. Then these legal trips are then given to the next step, that is crew rostering for further processing. How does crew pairing work? There are inputs, as I mentioned, timetable and airport turnaround times, crew legality and rest rules. Is this crew legally allowed to fly this aircraft? Are their licenses current? Is their training current? Then you need to know about the base and qualification information. The engine is the computer program or the system. It uses software to group flight legs into legal duty trips. It uses advanced math, AI algorithms, ML algorithms to find the best solutions. And what does it give you? It gives you a library of approved trips, pairings ready for crew rostering. Here is an example of a 2-day trip. So, a pilot has or a crew member has a base in New York. So, from JFK the first leg goes to Chicago, and from Chicago it goes to Denver, and then by that time you would have exceeded your time limitation. So, there is a layover. Next day you start from Denver, maybe there is a flight to Atlanta, and from Atlanta you go back to JFK and you return. So, this is like a 2-day trip. Now, this kind of a routing, it meets all the rest and duty hour rules. It starts and ends at the crew member's home base, which is New York in this case, and it is ready to be assigned to the rostering stage. This information is enough for rostering to start, and also it is legal. Now, what is meant by legal? Legal in crew pairing means that it meets all the aviation safety rules which are in force, right. There is something called as FDTL, Flight Duty Time Limitation. So, all regulatory bodies, they specify the maximum number of landings allowed in a week or a day or a month, maximum number of takeoffs allowed in a day, week or month, and how much rest has to be given to each crew member, how many hours can they fly in a week. This particular figure comes from the regulatory body. In India, this chart has come from the DGCA. Then there is a mandatory rest period, because pilots are humans and like every human being they require rest, especially if they are flying at very odd times. By red eye flights I mean the flights that start late in the night and end before sunrise or very early in the morning, right. So, these are the times when human beings are more comfortable taking rest and sleeping. Sometimes there are flights which go across various time zones, and that could also be a requirement for a mandatory rest period. If a crew member is crossing many flight zones in a flight, they will have a larger amount of mandatory rest required. So, this is legal, this has to be followed come what may. Here is an example of output of a software for a legal crew pairing. It shows source and destination, source S, destination D, which is the same place, and you can see there is a leg, then there is a sit time, then another leg, again sit time, another leg, and then rest. Okay. So, this is what I wanted to talk to you about crew scheduling. Thank you very much for your attention. We will now look at the next aspect, which is the crew pairing and the day of the operations state. Thank you so much.